session. We have three very interesting talks to follow. Two of them are going to be live talks. The first talk is by Dr. Anant Pande. First of all, we are very grateful for Dr. Anant for joining us out of making time out of some very deep personal commitments. Anant works as the program head with the marine program of WCS India. In his doctoral study, he looked at the nesting biology and population genetics of the snow petrel, an endemic bird of the Southern Ocean. This work was part of a long-term wildlife monitoring study supported by the Wildlife Institute of India and the Indian Antarctic Program. His presentation under the aegis of Project Seabird looks at developing baselines on Antarctic vertebrates, penguins, pelagic seabirds, and ice-breeding seals to inform conservation planning in the Antarctic. With that, I will hand over live to Dr. Anant Pande. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk to this August gathering. And I think I had been a part of Bird Monitoring Symposium. Now this is the second year. Last year also we had a poster presentation on seabirds of India. And this year, thanks for the opportunity for me to talk about my work, which I did in the Southern Ocean in Antarctica. So I'll start sharing my screen. Can you see it? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see you. We can't still see your screen.
Okay, it says screen has been shared. I don't know.
Can see your screen.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vidhi. So just give me 1 minute. Yeah, so my talk for today is basically I'll be talking about my work in East Antarctica. It is titled Strengthening Ecological Baselines Through Seabird Surveys in East Antarctica. Given today's current topic, seabird resurveys, when I started this work, there was very little information which was available on seabirds from East Antarctica. And when I started my work, I basically looked through all of the work which was done in the past, and then designed a survey to relook at those areas which were studied, which were surveyed earlier. But also I added a few new areas to look at what is the seabird presence over there, what is the distribution, how many kind of breeding localities are there of seabirds in East Antarctica. So giving a brief background, all of us know that IPCC in its report on special report said that even a 1.5 degree change in the 1.5 degree change in the global temperature would be catastrophic for the planet. And why it would be catastrophic? Because it will lead to a lot of sea ice loss. And how is that important? I'll also come to it later on in my slides. But it will also lead to a large number of extinctions, local extinctions, and also reduction in species ranges. There is a study which says that by changing temperatures, by warming sea temperature and these declines, basically it will also lead to a collapse of this particular species population, which is called as Antarctic krill. It is also the keystone species of the Southern Ocean, and also one of the major food for most of the larger vertebrates, penguins, seals, even whales. You would be surprised to know that the blue whales, they specifically feed upon Antarctic krill, so they have a tendency to feed on krill swarms. So even all these species which are dependent on the krills would have an impact. So it will be catastrophic for not only dependent marine mammals, which are whales and seals, but also a lot of seabirds, including the flying seabirds, the pelagic seabirds, as well as the non-flying, that is penguins. Then we have also national and international responsibilities to fulfill. We are part of India. When I say we, I'm talking about India. India is a part of the Antarctic Treaty System, which basically has reserved Antarctica for scientific studies and peaceful work, basically tourism. And we have also developed a national action plan on climate change, which talks about taking affirmative actions to tackle climate change in India and elsewhere. Also, we are party to Convention on Biological Diversity and International Convention for the Conservation of Marine Living Resources, which are two important conventions, international conventions, which make us kind of responsible to generate biodiversity information for Antarctica. There are two more treaties that I would like to mention here. There is one convention on conservation of Antarctic seals, which we are not a party of, and then the agreement on the conservation of albatrosses and petrels, which we are not a party of. Why we are not a party of these two conventions is basically because of lack of our own kind of gathering, own kind of data or kind of information which has been generated from the Indian Antarctic Program. But now, with the work that has been conducted in the last few years, we are kind of trying to get into these conventions as well. I'll give you a brief background of how India started its work in Antarctica. India started its first expedition in Antarctica in almost 43 years back now, 1981. And we built a station called as Dakshin Gangotri, which is now decommissioned because it was submerged under snow in around 1986 or 1987. But then we built another station, Maitri, which is at a place called as Shirmakar Oasis, and Bharti, which is a new station built in 2012 in Larseman Hills. These two areas are important, Shirmakar Oasis and Larseman Hills, because these are the areas where we did our most of the work. I'll to give a brief kind of overview of where these areas are located. So if you look at the map of Antarctica, this area is basically, these are the trans-Antarctic mountain ranges, and west of it is it's called as the West Antarctic, which is the West Antarctic Peninsula, and this area is the East Antarctic. These two stars are basically where the Indian stations are located. If you look at it, Maitri and Bharti. So Maitri is at Shirmakar Oasis, which is a small ice-free area located inland, almost 100 kilometers away from the coastline. And Larseman Hills, where Bharti is located, which is at the coastline. Close to Shirmakar Oasis, where Maitri is located, because Maitri, as I said, is inland, is an inland station. The coast of the Maitri looks like this. So this is the ice shelf. It is basically the ice glacier which is floating on the sea. And here, this sea freezes out in the winters, and it also forms part of some emperor penguins which come here to kind of molt. But this area is also important for us because here where our ship docks, and so many work has already been done on looking at what kind of animals or birds are found in this area. Then this is Shirmakar Oasis, which is 100 kilometers inland from Lazarev Sea or Nevlisen Ice Shelf. It says 34, it's a small area, but 34 square kilometer of ice-free paleo coast. When I say paleo coast, it means it was a coastline earlier. Now with the advent of with the kind of moving forward of the glaciers, this has come little towards the inland side. But earlier the coast was located somewhere here. Then Larseman Hills, which is further on the East Antarctic. It's a group of coastal islands, peninsulas, and promontories. About 50 odd islands, 54 odd islands or small rocky outcrops are there where seabirds basically come to breed. So this is how the austral summer looks like in Antarctica, which starts, austral summer is Antarctic summer, which starts somewhere in November and ends somewhere in early April. It is also the breeding season for seabirds. So seabirds, given their affinity to land for breeding, they come to land for breeding. And then they move out after breeding, they move out to the sea and for foraging and for movement. But this is the season when seabirds come to Antarctica to breed. And with the melting of sea ice during the summer, it also provides access to food resources. So you can see these, the hills in the background. These are the areas where the seabirds, most of the seabirds breed, which are found in the areas of East Antarctica. And when the sea ice breaks, it gives them closer access to the food. So sea ice is very important for kind of survival or for continuity of seabird breeding in the Antarctic region. There were many historical surveys, so we started 43 years back. So in the first expedition itself, for Dr. Parulekar from National Institute of Oceanography, he conducted the first seabird survey, and he reported about 13 seabird species, including a few species which are misidentified. Later on in 1983, it was Matthew from Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute who reported he gave a very kind of detailed account of penguins in that area, especially in India Bay. India Bay is near Lazarev Sea, and in Lazarev Sea, and also flagged misidentifications by Parulekar. Just a minute. Then later on in in mid 90s, Chattopadhyay, actually the work was done in early 90s in 1991. Mr. Chattopadhyay, he was from, I think, CMFRI again, and he was looking at snow petrel breeding at Shirmakar Oasis. And he looked in this because in that time we had only one station, Mathri. So that most of the people who went for historical surveys, they looked at seabirds in and around Shirmakar Oasis. So he reported that snow petrel is breeding in that area, and he reported that there was no breeding of WSP, which is Wilson's storm petrel. So given this background, there was another attempt by the Wildlife Institute of India to do kind of a systematic monitoring, which was started in in mid 90s from 1994 to 1997. WII scientists, they conducted about 3 expeditions where they collected detailed records of penguins and seals in areas closer to Shirmakar Oasis, because again there was only one station, so most of the surveys were restricted towards restricted in the periphery or in the region around Shirmakar Oasis. But very extensive kind of aerial surveys were done to look at where are the penguins breeding and where are the seals located. So they found very interestingly in Lazarus Sea. I showed you a picture of the ship in Lazarus Sea where there's no sea ice. But earlier there was a very thick sea ice used to be there, including in summer. And there they found the evidence of emperor penguins breeding in that area. In phase 2, which was started in around 2008 to 2010, 2 expeditions were done. Again, extensive aerial surveys conducted for seals and penguins. And then in phase 3, we tried to repeat kind of these areas to look at to generate exact information of how many species of seabirds are there. Because the records that were there from early on, they were very kind of confusing, not very clear on what species breed there, how many species are actually breeding that area, or where are their breeding locations. So those things we tried to understand or assess through our expeditions. So we were part of about 5 expeditions where we conducted systematic surveys to understand seabird distribution, and also looked at the possibility of doing continuous monitoring for select species. So this was done because in Antarctica, usually you do not have a lot of time to look at all the species. To do these resurveys again and again, it is very kind of difficult because of the time constraint. But we looked at the feasibility of looking at select indicator species. So this is a paper which I published in 2020, where we had using our information from the previous surveys done. So there were about 4 species which breed in. This is from Shirmakar Oasis, and this is from Shirmakar Oasis and areas around Shirmakar Oasis. So we had records of 4 species, very clear record of 4 species: Stercorarius McCormickii, which is South Polar skua; Pagodroma nivea, snow petrel; Oceanites oceanicus, which is Wilson storm petrel; and Pygoscelis adelie, which is Adelie penguin. So you see that in early 60s, these are the records which were generated by the Russian scientists and also a few German scientists, because there was a German station close to Indian station earlier. And then in late 80s, in mid 80s, from early 80s, sorry, and to mid 80s and 90s, this is the kind of data which appeared out of efforts by the Indian Antarctic expeditioners. Then if you see this values in bold, which is from 2014 to 16, this is the resurvey which was done in these areas, and we tried to understand exactly how many birds are breeding there. So we found that, okay, South Polar skua, there are 7 pairs breeding there. There are about snow petrel which is there, which are not breeding but in that area. So this is the thing. Earlier there was the survey in early 90s. Chattopadhyay reported snow petrel breeding in Shirmakar Oasis. But in our surveys in 3 expeditions, and then later on, we could not find any breeding of snow petrel in Shirmakar Oasis. Yeah, so these are the areas like Pellets Rock, Lanka. All of these areas, Oranfella Mountain, these are closer to Shirmakar Oasis, within the vicinity of Shirmakar Oasis. I would say that within a radius of 100 to 150 kilometer of Shirmakar Oasis. And in all these areas, we did surveys. We found out, okay, there was not much information which is there, but we did look at we did a resurvey and try to find out if we could substantiate this information and add more information to this. Again, coming back to Larsemann Hills, this was the you can see in in mid 1980s and in 1990s. There was very little information which appeared only from one peninsula. This is on the top. I'm sorry for small font, but this is the Brockness Peninsula, and from Brockness Peninsula only this in Larsemann Hills only this peninsula had information on breeding or occurrence of these seabirds, which is South Polar skua, snow petrel, Wilson storm petrel, and Adderley penguin. And all these bold in basically all these values in bold are basically values which were obtained by resurveys from 2014 to 2016. And we not only surveyed areas which were kind of surveyed by people in the past, but we also added more information. So apart from Brockness Peninsula, we also generated from other peninsulas and islands closer to in the Larsemann Hills area. So we surveyed about 41 islands in Larsemann Hills, and we found that there are 10 species of seabirds which were present at Larsemann Hills. Out of that, 5 species were resident, which included 2 species of penguins, Adderley penguin and emperor penguin, and 3 species of snow petrel, Wilson storm petrel, and South Polar skua, which are breeding exactly in Larsemann Hills. And all the other species like the giant petrel, southern giant petrel, light petrel, albatross, Antarctic petrel, Cape petrel, they were only using Larsemann Hills to move from one colony to another, or as part of their movement pathway. So it is not through our survey we have now confirmed that there are only 3 species which continuously breed in Larsemann Hills. And Adderley penguin also breeds very close to Larsemann Hills. I'll show you the picture of that. So this is what our resurveys established. We established how many areas, basically how many islands are occupied by these 3 species, and what are Adderley penguins doing in that area. So Adderley penguins are basically molting using Larsemann Hill islands for molting. It's a very different landscape. So you look at this is the picture of Larsemann Hills area. And if you see this is Brockness Peninsula. It's the largest. The largest peninsula of Larsemann Hills, and these red areas are basically areas occupied by snow petrels in Larsemann Hills, and these are the islands. So if you see this particular line, this is the line of the ship which moved through the sea ice, and it has come here, and it's a satellite image. And here is our station, which is Bharti located. It's also located on a promontory. And when I say peninsula, you can understand these are the peninsula which are connected to the Antarctic mainland. Similarly, for South Polar skua, we identified areas where South Polar skuas are breeding. The red area is again snow petrel breeding. So South Polar skuas, these are the only predators of snow petrels in that area. So they prefer to breed near snow petrel colonies. But there are other angles to obviously its breeding site selection. So that's a different topic. But these are the areas we found that, okay, snow petrels are breeding in Larsemann Hills. Then this bird, Wilson storm petrel, which is also sometimes seen off the coast of India, it comes here to breed in Antarctica. It also breeds in the subantarctic islands. And it's a small bird. It's around 29 grams average body mass, and breeds in very narrow cavities. So snow petrels and Wilson storm petrel, both of these species are rock cavity nesting birds. So they breed in narrow rock cavities. So storm petrel being even smaller, they breed in very narrow cavities inside in these rocky areas of Larsemann Hills. But due to their very narrow cavities, it's very difficult to identify their exact breeding locations. So very difficult. So we identified where they're breeding, but exact nest location was actually difficult. Then Adderley penguins also come to molt on Larsemann Hills Islands. Now, in the last expedition, last survey, we found out in this island, this is Betts Island, and in this island we found that a new colony of Adderley penguin has started. So this is something which is new. So when I said that Adderley penguin do not breed in Larsemann Hills, but they breed very close to Larsemann Hills. This area is called as Steiners Island. So we also looked at We also looked at we did aerial surveys of these breeding colonies and tried to understand how many birds are breeding. There were about 800 odd birds are breeding in that area. So this was the output which was generated after these resurveys. We are looking at the species presence and also the breeding locations of many species in that area, about 10 species which are found in Larsama Hills. So through this, we have generated a map, and now our next efforts are to focus on a few select species. Like one of the select species was snow petrel. We'll come to it. So we were doing nest monitoring where we looked at we fixed motion sensing cameras to look at their breeding behavior, and also using these cameras we could identify their breeding phenology, like what time they come to occupy the nest and what time is the laying, and how much time do they take to incubate the egg and later on for fledging. So this was done using specially designed motion sensing cameras, and this was again, as I said, for long-term monitoring effort, to continue our long-term monitoring effort for select indicator species, which is snow petrel. Because snow petrels are dependent on climate. They have very much a lot of dependence on snow, the presence of snow in that area. So in that way, we were looking at snow petrel breeding in Antarctica. And this is only 2 years of data, but we have 1 more year of data now on this particular aspect, on looking at the breeding success of the species. We are looking at laying success of snow petrels and hatching success, and we found out that it varies over two different seasons because of different kind of factors. But what is the most important factor is basically the weather, and with increase in extreme weather events in Antarctica due to changing climate, their breeding success, monitoring their breeding basically success is very important. Coming back to Schumacher Oasis, we did a complete survey of Schumacher Oasis. As I said, in the past, there were many papers which said there are around 10 pairs of skua, there are 4 pairs of skua, somebody said 9 pairs of skua. But currently, there are about 7 pairs of South Polar skua which breed in these localities. So these 4 dots, our station, Matri station, is located very close to it. And most of the skuas are breeding very close to the station. So what they do is they're also masters of stealing food. So they always try to steal food from the station, which they have been very successful in doing that. So in the last few years, 4 skuas have established territories. 4 skua pairs have established territories closer to the station, while the 3 more pairs very close vicinity of the station. But there's no other species which is breeding at Schumacher Oasis, and we have found out that there might be Wilson storm petrel breeding, but we could not find any evidence of that. There was no snow petrel breeding. Snow petrels breed further south of Schumacher Oasis. There are mountains called as Gruba Mountains and Orenfella, where we have found records of snow petrel breeding. Adley penguins, they come because Schumacher Oasis is an inland site. It is not very close to the coastline. So Adley penguins, they sometimes stray into these areas and try to breed. So there were 2 incidents of Adley penguin breeding in Schumacher Oasis in 2008 and 2007. These 2 images are kind of only images of penguins with eggs in Schumacher Oasis. So it's basically a stray kind of incident. In the way forward, we are looking at long-term ecological research to especially for snow petrels and a few other species, to look at factors influencing seabird breeding patterns. We're also trying to undertake work on understanding their movement patterns. So we have also tagged a few birds, especially South Polar skua. We have tagged around 6 birds to look at their movement patterns. And we are also very actively looking for collaborations to strengthen the Antarctic wildlife monitoring program. With that, I thank people who have helped us in collecting this very kind of, I would say, I'm very lucky to work in Antarctica, and it's very difficult to gather data from that area. So I'm thankful to all the people who helped me to do that. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Anant. That was a really awesome presentation, and thank you for transporting us to the South Pole. There's a lot of excitement, and My own personal question is, how do we get to join an expedition to the Antarctic? But you can respond to that later. I will take one question from Discord, and then because we are running beyond time, and I request you to get onto Discord and answer the questions there. This is from Monica. She says, "Kudos, Anant, for counting birds in Antarctic. It must have been challenging. Looking at some locations, the breeding and nesting pairs have increased compared to the baseline. Do you think it's a real increase or lack of reporting in the previous survey?"
Yeah, so both actually. Thanks, Monica, for that question. So I would say one aspect is most parts of Antarctica where we work are basically kind of they were not surveyed enough, and there was not much kind of attention given to pelagic birds breeding in Antarctica. But there's another factor which is operating there. So with the loss in sea ice, many new kind of sites are opening up. Many new sites are opening up in terms of accessibility to breeding sites. So we say again, I cannot say much, but we say that with increase in these ice-free areas which are accessible to seabirds during the summer, I would say there could be a possibility of more birds coming to breed in that area. So again, we need at least 3 to 4, 10 years more of data to kind of support this theory. But this is again a building hypothesis, and I would say that this is what we are trying to look at. If the seabird breeding pattern is changing, if there are more numbers breeding in that area. So for that, we have now kind of long-term monitoring plots to monitor that.
Thank you, Dr. Anand, once again. And I request you to get onto Discord and answer some of the questions there. With that, we'll end your session and we'll move to the next session, which is from the South Pole. We are going to go to the Bay of Bengal. Dr. Ravichandra Mondreti is a marine biologist with a broad research interest in conservation biology, marine ecology, and ornithology, and has a PhD on the ecology of seabirds in the Bay of Bengal and Lakshadweep, with a special conservation focus on the Sooty Tern of Pitti Island, Lakshadweep, India. He's currently working as a scientist and principal consultant for a wildlife conservation and research foundation in Chandigarh, India. He will share about pelagic surveys in the Bay of Bengal. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Ravi. Welcome, Ravi, and thank you for joining us live.
Yeah, thanks, Ram. Thank you very much. So, hello, everyone. A very good morning, I would say. I'm going to talk about my work on pelagic seabirds in the Bay of Bengal. This forms a part of my PhD work, which I have done some time back. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So coming to, as you see here, seabirds are one of the apex predators, and they occupy a prime position in the marine food webs. And here, as you see in the picture, the crested auklet and wandering albatross are seen along with other marine mammals in the Bering Sea and Atlantic food webs. Next one, please. So as you see here, seabirds are one of the best indicators for signaling changes in the oceanic environment at various scales. They are highly visible and can be easily counted due to their colonial nature. And they, in fact, they're one of the very useful indicators in understudied ecosystems like Bay of Bengal, where you see regular threat of development pressures like exploitative fishing and other such pressures. Next one, please. Yeah, as you see here, Bay of Bengal has comparatively low number of seabird species to that of other large marine ecosystems such as Pacific and Atlantic oceans. Next one. So this is like the current scenario of seabirds in India. So as you see here, basically BirdLife International lists around like 75 marine species in India. And during like before my study, there haven't been any studies on seabirds. So, and it's one of the poorly studied ecosystem. Next one, please. So as you go across, like you during my when I reviewed various studies on seabirds during the course of my PhD, I found there are many gaps in knowledge on seabirds. And what I could at the time, what I could infer was that most of the the records were actually basically opportunistic in nature, and in fact there were never any systematic or dedicated census happening at the time. Even I guess at this time around also not much work is happening. So our work is a preliminary attempt basically to understand the potential of potential interactions also among pelagic longliners in this part of the ocean. Next one, please. So the following are were my study objectives, which specifically addresses those gaps. And number one objective was to establish baseline information about at-sea distribution in the Bay of Bengal, and the second objective was to look at broad links between seabird distributions and environmental parameters like sea surface temperature, productivity, and ocean depth. Ocean depth is usually indicated by bathymetry. And the third objective was also to look at the interactions between seabirds and pelagic longline fisheries. Next one, please. So yes, yeah, and this is my study area. This was my study area where it is one of the 64 large marine ecosystems that has been outlaid by NOAA, National Oceanic Administration. So now this ecosystem is currently facing overexploitation of fish stocks, habitat degradation, and land-based pollution. And it is on, like I would say, it's very important to conserve this ecosystem, as there is a lot of population pressure as well, because most of the population living along the coast depend on this ecosystem for their livelihood. Next one, please. So here, this was my, I would say, the place, like the area where I have done the carried out my study. So this map basically indicates the location of all the cruise tracks along, and also it also shows the major ports along the east coast of India. So I have carried out like at-sea surveys, basically from two main ports of India. So one is the Kolkata and the other one is the Chennai. And I have taken the cruises from like Kolkata to Port Blair, and via en route I have also done from Port Blair to Kolkata as well. And similarly, I have performed the same cruise from Chennai to Port Blair, and also back from Port Blair to Chennai. So here, basically each point in the map equals like 1 hour of observation on the transit. Next one, please. Yes, coming to the methods which I have employed. So basically, I have performed continuous surveys since like in this part of the ocean, basically you have a very low density of seabirds. Like we don't come across seabirds very often. So you need to record whatever whatever you see and observe, during the cruises. So for my observations, or like I have typically used both passenger and research vessels. So for the methodology part, I have followed the seabirds at sea standard protocols, which have already been used by many seabirders across the world. And all my observations I have done completely when the ship was steaming and when it's always on the move, and right from sunrise to sunset. I have done my observations on one side of the vessel, and I have always seen to the point that I wanted to record everything which is at the point of sight, like, so I don't want to miss anything. So I've taken the limit of detection to around 500 meters from the observation point. So all the cruises were around like 3 to 5 days of duration, and they have been carried out like across different years, like starting from 2000 to 2014, and all from two major shipping ports like Chennai and Kolkata. Next one, please. So some additional observations were actually carried out by one of my collaborator. His name is Peter G. Rang. So he's from University of Cape Town. He has done a 23-day research cruise using a research vessel, French research vessel, right in the middle of the ocean, middle of the Bay of Bengal. So and also, like, there was a person, like, I have to mention, because one scientist called Dr. John Baptiste Thibault has assisted me. In fact, and he was the one who trained me, at sea surveys, right in the beginning of the surveys. So yeah, coming to the analysis part, actually, I have used like different oceanographic variables such as bathymetry, which indicates ocean depth, and sea surface temperature, which indicates the temperature of the ocean to a particular depth, and also chlorophyll A, which indicates the primary productivity. And all these parameters have been derived from different repositories, and they have while generating the GIS maps, I have actually basically overlaid the seabird abundance data on all these parameters, and finally I generated a map. Yeah, which I'll discuss in the later next slide. So all observations that we have carried out have always been on an elevated platform, either on the flying bridge or the bow. Flying bridge is basically is the one which is, as you see in the picture, right on the top, right corner, or else on the bow, anywhere on the deck, anywhere on the deck of the ship, either it can be, anywhere like very close to the bow. Next one, please. So this is my entire survey effort, I would say. Like, we covered a total distance of 4,722.3 kilometers at an average speed of 20 kilometers per hour for a total of 39 days. And it was like the linear effort was around like 323 hours in total. Next one, please. So as you see here, like, this is a typical passenger vessel which I have used for most of my surveys. So right from beginning, even in Kolkata and Chennai, I have used the same one. So next one, please. And this was the research vessel which was used, like, which the other collaborator have used for carrying out the observations right in the middle part of the Bay of Bengal. Next one, please. So coming to my results. So I have, like, during our study, we have observed like around like 2,697 individual species of seabirds. Individuals of seabirds. All they consist like around like 17 species in total. And among all the species, what we found, like, basically sooty terns and vegetable shearwaters are the most abundant, and they constitute like around 97% of all the bird species cited. Next one, please. So here, this is like a pantropical, this is like a sooty tern. This is a sooty tern basically, which I have photographed it while carrying out a study in Lakshadweep, in a small island called Piti. So it is quite interesting where it is along with this egg. Next one, please. And this is another species which you frequently come across. While if you take any cruise, in the Bay of Bengal, this also encountered quite frequently. Next one. And these are some of other species, other less frequently cited species, like if you come across like clockwise. One is the flesh-footed shearwaters, lesser frigate bird, and streaked shearwater, and greater crested tern. Next one, please. Yeah. Yes, and as you see here, I also like looked at the distributions of seabirds, and when I have this is like the preliminary map when I have at the time of the complete data field work, I have looked at the distributions. What I found is like basically we observed the highest number of city terns in the shelf breakwaters, very close to Andamans and all. So unlike other species of seabirds. Next one, please. But however, it is like a different case with the vegetal shearwaters, because vegetal shearwaters they're more spread out evenly, and more numbers were found near the middle part of the ocean. Next one. Next one, please. So after looking at the distributions, then I have basically looked at. I wanted to see whether there is an association between seabird distributions and environmental parameters. So what I have done is basically I have, in fact, I have taken the sea surface temperature and overlaid on the seabird distribution, and I have seen whether there is an association between them. So since seabirds, distribution follow changes in surface circulation patterns. So we observe seabird distributions to be unaffected by changes in oceanographic parameters, even including sea surface temperature, bathymetry, and primary productivity. So here the solid line indicates the bathymetric contour, which represents the continental shelf break. Next one, please. Yes, and this is the map of bathymetric map which I have generated. Yes, and as you see here, Bay of Bengal is one of the most highly fished area. Heavily, if you come across that, there is heavy fishing happening over major part of the ocean, and as such, next one, please. As such, I was also interested to look at the interactions between seabirds and fisheries. So we wanted to see whether there is any, whether we can quantify those interaction and see how it is. So during the course of the work, I have seen there is, in order to understand the interactions between seabirds and all, we wanted to look at the extent of overlap, spatial overlap between especially the aerial usage of both seabirds and fisheries. Next one, please. So what we found was interesting. So it was we found substantial overlap was there between seabird distribution and longline fisheries in the area, and fishing effort. We have expressed this fishing effort as a means, number of fishing hooks per year deployed in a 5-degree cell. Next one, please. So this is the outcome of our study. After this involves the major part of my study, at sea surveys. So all the at sea surveys and the fisheries data have been in fact have been published. Yes, next one, please. So coming to conclusions, I would say not exactly conclusions, but the future course of direction should be like it should involve like we have to like gather detailed information and data on the distribution and diversity of pelagic seabirds in the Bay of Bengal, and which will lead better inferences for understanding seabird community composition structure in this studied area. And also there is a need for further research and resurveys on pelagic seabirds in the Bay of Bengal. So this has to be carried out on a consistent manner and in a phase-wise manner. And there should be some standardized approach, which has to be like it should be uniform across different years, so that data is consistent throughout, and which could be useful for generating patterns and trends. Next one, please. So coming to the this is like one of my basically coming to the theme of this conference. I wanted to in fact put my study in the perspective of the conference. So what I have seen is like basically there is especially very in fact, resurveys are very useful in the Bay of Bengal, as most of the cases is like you don't have any information, any historical information, and it's very important to understand, that there is the resurveys are important in the perspective of data scarcity, to understand the population trends, and also to see whether there is any change in seabird abundance across different spatial scales, spatial as well as temporal scales. Next one, please. So it is therefore essential that pelagic resurvey programs, should follow a particular, standardized protocols, such as like seabirds at sea surveys, and there are these protocols already in place, and which has been used by many seabird researchers across the globe. And I would say I had just highlighted few I would say mention few points, so which are the most important, when laying out the protocol. And as you see here, and citizen science initiatives are one approaches where you can generate large, data sets over different spatial and temporal scales. And fortunately, like in India, there are many budding, naturalists and ecologists who are working in close, in close association with some scientists, and I have come across over the years, like it's starting to catch up in India. And then, unlike like in other places, like for example, I have seen like eBird and common bird monitoring program by BNHS and this Kerala Bird Atlas. And there are many initiatives, and probably seabirds also, there should be some monitoring scheme which involves a lot of volunteers, and so that data can can be obtained at the at a rapid scale. Next one, please. Yeah. So there are many technology-based approaches which can be used. Then these are the following technology. Next one, please. So finally, I would like to thank the organizers. I would like to thank some people during the course of my study, and I would first of all thank the support which has been provided by the Erasmus program, without which I could not have completed this study. Next one, please. And there are many other people whom I would like to thank, but yeah, next one. So finally, I would like to thank the organizers of the Bird Monitoring in India Symposium for giving me this opportunity, and also for their wonderful support and assistance. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ravi, for this very fascinating talk about birding and bird research and bird monitoring for pelagic birds. I'm going to quickly go over to Discord and pose some questions from there. And the first is from Karthik. He says, you mentioned that the surveys were done within a 90-degree, you mentioned that the surveys were done within a single 90-degree quadrant. Why was this restriction in place, or have I misunderstood?
Yeah. So should I answer it directly? Should I take?
Yes,
Can
we
you
have
take the
time only
question
for
right now
one
itself?
question, so answer that, and I request
Okay,
I
I
request you
get
to
it.
go
I
to
understand.
Discord to answer the rest.
Okay, I got it. I got it. Thanks, Ramya. So what I would say is like basically there is this from the point of observation. So what we have done is basically like there is this field of view. So we only considered the ones which we come across in front, like and only one I would say 90-degree since we have considered because that is usual field of view. So if had we considered like 180-degree, so the field of view would have increased, and there is a fair chance that we will be missing some birds. So as such, so we have limited to our field of vision to 90 degrees only to record as many birds as possible during the survey. Yes. Hope I have answered this question.
Yeah, I think so. And anyway, I'll request you to go to Discord. Once again, Ravi, thank you very much. And
Thank you.
with that, I'll conclude your session, and I'll move on very quickly to the next session. Again, from the Bay of Bengal, we go to South America and probably to Papua New Guinea. Our speaker is Benjamin Freeman. He is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of British Columbia. His research investigates how montane birds are responding to climate change. He's currently traveling on the west coast of Canada, and because of the time difference, he's unable to join us live. So I request you all to pose questions for him on Discord, where he is available. And with that, I will hand over to the team to go to his presentation. Thank you.
All right. I'm excited to be able to participate in this symposium and tell you a little bit about my research using resurveys to show that tropical montane birds are on an escalator to extinction. Okay, so the problem, right, is climate change. And as biologists, we're asked to make predictions about where species will live in a warmer future. I mainly study montane species, and so I'm going to ask the question here. Consider the question of where will montane species live in a warmer future. Now, to make this prediction, we can assume that species live where they do because that's where the temperature is right for them. So a species that today lives only in the middle of the mountain, where temperatures are relatively moderate, perhaps it doesn't live in the bottom because it's too hot. It doesn't live in the top because it's too cold. Very simplistic, but here's a starting point. Okay, in this model, we can make the prediction that species in the warmer future are going to live at higher elevations. It's because at those higher elevations in the future, whenever everything's warmer, those kind of moderate temperatures that today are present in the middle of the mountain, in the future will be present near the top of the mountain. It's as if species are going to ride an escalator, living at higher and higher elevations over time. This becomes an escalator to extinction for high elevation species that have nowhere higher to move into. Their preferred temperatures are predicted to disappear, leading to local extinctions. So this question of where will montane species live in a warmer future, a prediction that's been often made, is that they're going to live at higher elevations, and high elevation species may disappear and become extinct. What I want to think about today is, how do we know if these predictions are reasonable, if they're right? And I answer this question by investigating how species have responded to recent warming, under the thinking that how species have responded to the recent decades of warming will give us the best insight into how they're likely to respond to future warming. So really what I'm talking about is to conduct resurveys, to consider where species live now compared to where they used to live. So there's an original survey and we do a resurvey now, because that's a hugely powerful tool to understand how species have responded to recent warming, which, as I just said, gives us information about how they may respond to future warming. So the resurveys are a very powerful tool, and I'm talking about resurveys that are called snapshot resurveys, where there's one historical data set and one modern data set. That's great. That's often what we have. It's even better if there's many data sets through time. But I'm going to consider two questions. First, is the escalator to extinction in action? Second, can we say anything about the biogeography of this phenomenon? So first, I'm going to tell you about a study that I did on this mountain in Peru. This is the Cerro de Pantecoya. It's in southeastern Peru, pictured here. And what I did was study birds and where they lived along the Pantecoya transect, circled in red. This is a very remote place, but I went there because pictured here, this guy, John Fitzpatrick, my graduate advisor, studied birds on the same transect in 1985 when I was 1 year old. Okay, and in 1985, he was very interested in determining the elevations where species lived and produced data that looks like this, where each species, for 110 common species, each species is a different column, and the elevations where it lived in 1985 are shown in gray. So there's some lowland species that only live in the lowlands. There's only a couple species that lived everywhere. Then there's some species that only lived at higher elevations along this transect. I was particularly interested in these species that only lived at the top of the mountain when I was 1 in 1985. These were those mountaintop species, common at the mountaintop in 1985. And so what we did was a resurvey. We went back in 2017. I led a team where we surveyed at the same places that had been originally surveyed. This place has gotten a bit warmer in my lifetime. Not so much, right? 0.4 degrees Celsius, not a huge increase, but an increase nonetheless. Equates to about 70 meters upslope shift in the temperature isotherm. So if birds are tracking temperatures, we'd expect them to live about 70 meters higher now than in 1985. This place also has had no land use changes whatsoever. And I just want to, before I show you some data, I want to show you some pictures of these birds to remind both me and you how cool these birds are. The natural history of these birds is phenomenal. I love learning about the things that they do in their environment and the cool adaptations they have to succeed in their environment. Beautiful birds. Then I put this picture in to show you that, because as I'm sitting here kind of freezing in March on the patio in Vancouver, BC, where I live, I'm like, oh man, I would love to be there studying those birds right now. And I would, but I put this in to remind myself that this is also very challenging field work to do. I have never experienced the quantity of stingless bees, for example, that live on this particular mountain. I did a logistical trip to see if this was a feasible project in 2016. Upon determining that it was, and upon learning that this place was awash in stingless bees and other types of bees as well. So in 2017, when we did the study, I was prepared and I had made these cool little mosquito net places that we could safely process birds inside. So remember that when it's a remote place, go there first to see if it's a reasonable place to work and what you need to successfully work there. So is this escalator to extinction in action? Well, we can make several predictions about how this works. First, species should be tracking their temperature increases by shifting upslope, riding this escalator. Montane species should be shrinking in their elevational range. And some of these mountaintop species should be going extinct. So is this happening? So again, each species of these 110 common species shown here in gray, well, we found some species that have colonized elevations that they didn't used to live. I'm going to show those in green. Those are predominantly at species' upper elevational limits, okay? So species' upper limits have shifted up by 117 meters on average. We also found cases where species have disappeared from elevations where they used to live. Contractions. I'm going to show these in orange. These are predominantly at species' lower elevational limits, which the lower limits have shifted up by 68 meters on average. So yeah, those are ballpark to the expectation of a 70-meter shift based on the amount of regional warming. So yeah, species are shifting upslope, tracking temperature increases relatively closely. Do these have consequences for the range sizes of high elevation species? They do. So I'm going to show you this plot here is change in elevational range size on the x-axis. Negative means the ranges are shrinking. And the mountaintop species, their ranges are shrinking. The mid-elevation species have stable range sizes, and the lowland species are actually expanding their range because they live a little bit higher up on the mountain now than they used to, and they still live down at the river. And we also see negative changes in abundance for these high elevation species. So they're getting squeezed into a smaller area and there's fewer of them. These high elevation species circled in red here have negative changes in abundance. So we have evidence then that high elevation species are getting squeezed into a smaller area and there's fewer of them. So that sounds like the escalator to extinction to me. So did we find evidence that some mountaintop species have indeed disappeared from this mountain? Important to note, all these species live on many mountains. This is only one mountain in their range, so these are local extinctions that we were interested in. We were very interested in determining whether this might be what has been happening here. So we expended a lot of survey effort at the mountaintop. But despite this high survey effort, we failed to find variable ant shrikes, or buff-browed foliage gleaners, or white-eared solitaires, or fulvous-breasted flatbills, or hazel-fronted pygmy tyrants. You can't prove that something isn't there. But when we fit occupancy models to estimate the probability that these birds were there and we failed to detect them given our survey effort, those probabilities were very low, giving us confidence in our inference that these species really have disappeared from this particular mountaintop. So this finding of an escalator to extinction in action for a community, this is the first time that people actually had evidence. It's the first time people had really investigated a situation where it could have happened, but it was the first evidence for a community on an escalator to extinction. So it got covered in the news. Here's BBC, Atlantic, etc. And so I wanted to talk about the escalator to extinction, and I just showed you a case example where it's an action. And I also want to tell you a little bit about the biogeography of this, because as I published this, I was very curious about, like, is this something that's just happening to these birds on one mountain, or is this happening more broadly? Can we generalize this result? And in particular, we have some reasons it's been proposed that tropical species should be particularly vulnerable to the escalator to extinction for several reasons that I'm not going to get into today, but again, would be happy to talk to anyone about. So I compiled data from all the resurveys that have been published, mine and many others, to test whether we have evidence that in the tropics species are tracking their temperature increases with upslope shifts, and tropical montane species are getting squeezed in their ranges. So this first question of whether tropical species are tracking temperature better, I'm going to cut to the chase and just tell you that we found evidence that this is what is happening by analyzing a set of 93 different resurveys plotted here on this map of a variety of different taxa. We found that in the tropics, species are tracking temperature increases better than in the temperate zone. In the temperate zone, they're often not really changing the elevations where they live very much, even as it gets warmer. You'll notice that South Asia is very poorly represented on this map. There's really only one resurvey I'm aware of plants from the Himalaya. So hopefully some of you today can add some data or start to think about adding some data to this map. And I also want to make a quick plug for some of the papers that I write. I write a rap and perform it and post a video on Twitter. And so I wrote one that I was pretty proud of and put that on Twitter, a rap about this paper. And MC Hammer, who's from early 90s rapper in the US, he liked it on Twitter. It was pretty cool. So yeah, we found evidence that tropical species, that what I showed for this escalator to extinction in action for these Peruvian birds seems to be what's happening more broadly in tropical species. What about this idea that like what's happening for these Peruvian birds where the high elevation species are getting their ranges squeezed? Is that happening more broadly? So I looked at this by getting together all the resurvey data from different taxa, different places. And when I look at all this data together, I found evidence that, yeah, the mountaintop species in general are shrinking. But when I broke this into this was really driven by the tropical species. So shown here are the species just from the tropics. Resurveys that have been done in the tropics typically find that the mountaintop species, these high elevation species, are getting squeezed in range, just like the birds in Peru that I showed you earlier. The birds in Peru, that data is actually not in this analysis, so the pattern would be much stronger if I were to update this analysis and include that data. In contrast, the temperate zone mountaintop species aren't really systematically changing in their elevational range size, which I was quite surprised by. But yeah, we found evidence that in the tropics, there seems to be this escalator to extinction is just what's happening more generally. Still not very many studies though, and there aren't other studies that have documented the local extinctions that I showed that are happening in Peru. So I'm working on projects to investigate whether this is happening in more places. I think it's really important that we try to get answers to how general this phenomenon of the escalator to extinction is. And that will really require resurvey type data sets. Again, I hope some of you in the audience here can get inspired by this and do your own projects. So to start here, I talked about climate change and how biologists were asked to make predictions about how species will respond. And today I showed you some evidence from resurveys showing that the escalator to extinction, it's in motion already in my lifetime, not just something for future generations to worry about. I've shown you some evidence that this is particularly or maybe only true in the tropics. But I want to point out, I want to leave you with, we still don't know how most species in most places are responding to climate change. And when I think about this, I think about hopefully there's more data sets that will come to light that can provide that historical baseline that we can do a resurvey and compare to. It makes me think of this quote that the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, and the second best time is now. So even if there's not that historical data, we need to be going out and doing surveys now so that future workers can use our data that we collect now as a baseline. To this end, I started the Mountain Bird Network using eBird basically to do point counts along elevational gradients. And I organized a group of folks here at UBC to study this mountain that's right behind Vancouver, you can see, called Mount Seymour. We did point counts at different elevations and did some cool stuff with it. So we can just look at species richness. Okay, it declines with increasing elevation. I can use occupancy models to model the abundance of two species of thrush, one that lives lower, one that lives higher. So there's some cool biology here as well. It's also a really great data set that we can use to document where species live at present that we can then refer to in the future. This effort of the Mountain Bird Network got covered in the Albuquerque Journal. Here's a friend of mine, birding with a purpose, and I love that phrase. And so I hope that resonates with some of you. And so if you want to join this Mountain Bird Network, get in touch with me. And especially this spring, I'm going to try to get a lot of folks in the northern hemisphere. And also, of course, in tropical places, but in the northern hemisphere spring, interested in this, and then in the southern hemisphere, folks that want to do it in the breeding season later in 2023, of course, very, very welcome as well. And so with that, I'd like to thank some funding agencies and collaborators, and then I'll be available for any questions, and excited to just say hi to me on the Discord server or on Twitter, shoot me an email. Love to say hi to you. And if you have questions, send them to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I know that you're not here with us live, but I hope that you get to see this presentation and this follow-up conversation later on. I would just want to say that your enthusiasm is infectious. Even though this is such a serious topic, it's so nice and so great to see so much energy. It's really inspiring. And as you say, there is some great urgency to get out and start documenting this escalator that you talk about, or the effect of climate change on birds. As you're not here live, I'm going to request all the audience to please post your questions on Discord for Ben. I'm sure that when he wakes up in a few hours from now, he'll get onto Discord and check out the questions and get back to you on that. With that, we are going to go into an early lunch break. I want to inform all of you that please do get back at 2 p.m. For our panel discussion. We have a great panel waiting to discuss the talks that we've heard so far and also address some more questions on the value of resurveys. During your lunch break, I also request that you visit the poster sections. They're already live right now. Though we have a dedicated session to posters that are after the panel discussion. The posters are already live. The more amount of time you spend there and the more amount of time you examine these posters and interact with the people who have put in quite a bit of effort to make these great posters, it'll be great to have your interactions there as well. With that, I'm going to close for lunch. Thank you for all the speakers who spoke today, for your time, for your patience, and for such great and fantastic presentation from all over the world. Some of them, most of them are, they are all really inspiring. So with that, I'll close for now. Thank you.